This is Blake Atwood with FaithVillage.com. We're talking with Ken Coleman, host of his own syndicated radio talk show, aptly named The Ken Coleman Show, and author of One Question, Life-Changing Answers from Today's Leading Voices. If an average Joe wanted to seek advice from a lofty luminary like the people profiled in your book, how would you advise them to proceed?
Yeah. Well, the first thing is when you go after anybody's time and attention who is very busy and sought after, then you need to be very purposeful to get right to the point. And I would lead with the question. You know, the mistakes some people make sometimes, they'll walk up to somebody if they get that chance and they'll spend 30 to 60 to 90 seconds qualifying all these things, and they put pressure on themselves. And I found that, you know, when I've interviewed celebrities, it gets to the point now where I literally have been around celebrities enough that I don't get that, you know, awe factor anymore. And I think that's important. Because what I've learned is I've got to interview these people. So I'm having these high-profile conversations in front of thousands. I mean, you know what I'm talking about, Blake. I mean, at Dallas with Emmett Smith, that's 3,500 people, and that's a small crowd. You know, in October, I'll interview somebody on the Catalyst stage. There's 13,000 people eavesdropping in. Well, in those moments, you have to kind of drown out that audience and get focused completely on the conversation. And when you realize that they're just another person, like you are, lead with the question. So let's say you're at some event and you see some celebrity or somebody that you really admire. Instead of walking up to them and go, hey, so-and-so, I'm a big fan, really love what you do. Hey, I'd like to, boom, get right up to them and say, hey, I've always wanted to ask you this, and just ask them. Now, one of two things is going to happen. Okay, if it's a really good question, you're going to get their attention. At that point, they're going to then decide, do I answer this, or do I not have time, and therefore I'm going to kind of brush you off, or whatever's going to happen. But I can tell you this, if you lead with a great question, and by the way, here's an audacious thing, how about emailing them? Just email them a great question. Cut through all the garbage and all the superfluous, you know, hey, I think you're great, and all this kind of, just send them a question. And you will be surprised. That's how I got a lot of people in the book. They didn't know me from Adam's House Cat. But I gave them a one paragraph, this is what the book's about, and this is the question I want to ask you. And it got me more yeses than you could possibly imagine. Do you know why? Because a good question connects. And they go, and their mental capacity in that moment can receive that question, and instead of all this gray matter and all this noise they're hearing from people like, oh, you're so great, and I love you, and all this kind of stuff, if you go right to them with a piercing question, then their brain can take that in, obviously, but it cuts through all the clutter, and then they go, oh, that's a pretty good question. And see, now they're engaging, because they look at you instantly and go, well, this was a well-thought-out question, and I want to answer this. And so that's what I would say, is lead with the question. No jab. Just lead with that right cross, and I think that you'll be surprised how much access and ultimately great wisdom you'll get. That advice works. I promise you. I do this all the time with my friends. I forget who we saw. It's going to come to me in a moment. But it was somebody, it was a celebrity. It was a pretty big deal. And we were in a lobby. There was only about 12 or 14 people just kind of gathered, and then the celebrity comes in with 2 or 3 people. And about half the group recognized him. I surveyed the room real quick, and I realized not everybody in here realizes that's a big shot. And I went up to him and just asked a question, just out of nowhere. Didn't even say, hey, my name's Ken, and I think you're great. I just literally went up and said, hey, and here's the question. I asked it. And I'll tell you who it was. It was Braylon Edwards, NFL wide receiver for the New York Jets. And, you know, we were in Miami. That's who it was. And, I mean, that area is a big deal. And I just walked up to him and asked him a question about playing football. And it was a good question. He said, hey, how much more football are you going to play? And it was one of those personal questions, but it also had a little bit of opportunity for him to answer it. I wanted it to be personal. And he just answered it. He's like, man, as long as my body will let me, I think I got 2 or 3 good seasons left. And see, now he's engaged with me, and all these people around us are like, and I remember my friends going, wow, I just can't believe you'd walk up to me and ask him a question. I'm like, again, you know, if I'd have walked up to him like, hey, Braylon, man, you know, University of Michigan, man, I love you, man, he'd have given me maybe some response, but it wouldn't have been there. But then when I asked him a quick question about himself, that's not the general, you know, hey, man, you like playing in the NFL? You know what I mean? He engaged with it. And so that's just a simple example of just the audacity to ask a good question gets you really far in life.